culture really gets hard when there's massive disruption or change or a lot of
cut is going to impact the culture in some way, and you don't exactly know how it's going to until it's kind of shaken out.
Your calm is their calm. Your panic is their panic.
Culture isn't the team offsite. It's what you do when the business is on fire.
Oh, that's my little secret. If I'm speaking to a leader right now, I would say,
hi, and welcome to What the FTE. I'm your host, Bellay, P&C business partner at Certain, and today's guest is Stacy Parkinson. She's the people and culture leader who guided us through a major merger with Equative while raising engagement and collecting multiple awards for culture along the way. This episode digs into what most leaders get wrong about culture and what it really takes to preserve trust, identity, and performance in times of upheaval. So thank you so much for being here. We're super excited to talk to you, Stacy.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks.
We're just going to dive right into it. We're here to talk about culture during real change. When do you think culture gets hard?
So let's just start off with saying that culture is always hard. It's never a check done, check in the box type of thing. You always have to work on your company culture. So because it's always changing, it's always evolving. So to get a little bit more precise, when I do think that it gets harder, that is through rapid growth. So whether that is through, rapid growth through acquisitions, for example, so mergers and acquisitions, it could be through an economic downturn as well. It could be a major play in the market. So, a play by one of your competitors. But yeah, organizational change like mergers and acquisitions, that's where the rubber really hits the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of touch on so many of those big pieces right there. And I see a lot of similarities with where Certain has been. And I mean, the global pandemic, as of recently, going through those mergers and acquisitions and like those big times of change and growth where you're really challenging if you don't have an extremely strong foundation on what that looks like and how to scale it, it becomes incredibly difficult. I'm curious, was there a moment where you've seen corners kind of get cut during culture, like with culture and values, and how did that work out?
I think corners get cut when I think in rapid growth is an excellent example of that, where you're just kind of looking to hire so many people, in a short time span that culture, there's cutting of corners in the, onboarding that you really go through with your new hires. I think there's a lack of consistency in that onboarding and the experience that employees could have. I think there's also cutting corners, let's say, in everything that's leadership development, for example. So when you're just focusing on bringing people on board and trying to keep people on board, you tend to invest a little less in leadership development, learning initiatives, and so on.
Yeah. And it feels like, culture is so intangible that it's one of those things that can be challenging to make a case to be at the forefront. It's like we know it's important and we need to prioritize it, but like also all of these things are on fire right now. So we're going to kind of push it off a little bit in lots of cases. I'm not sure if that's been like your experience, but how do you ensure that is kept at the forefront? And how are you making that kind of business case?
Make people aware that in everything that we do, there's the cultural element to it. And so what I sometimes say is that treat culture like your product. So in everything that you do, you think of your customer, you think of the best product for your customer. Well, treat culture like it's a product. So you always have to iterate, you always have to evolve it, you always have to think of what your customer, in which case this is like your employees, ultimately your customers want and need. So it just has to be in everything that you do. And obviously I'm an advocate for the culture, but culture is not only on Stacy Parkinson. It's not just on my shoulders. So, you have to have your leadership team and the CEO and the whole executive team and all leaders really be cultural icons as well, so that they help you be that advocate.
Yeah, that's like the coolest kind of reframe, and I hadn't heard it in that exact way before, but kind of treating culture as like a product of your organization, especially from a people and culture lens. But how do you reiterate? How do you go back to kind of market and understand what's changing in the market or what's changing with your employee base and in the talent space, to make sure that you're keeping at the front of it and being extremely like, innovative with that. That's so good. And I'm really hearing those pieces around like leading by example, like on that leadership space.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
absolutely. Super fair.
I'm curious, is there a moment in your career where you felt like culture was on the line? Like it could all unravel?
Yeah, I think I've been there, unfortunately. One example that comes to mind is through a major organizational restructuring. So post-merger. So just for context, I've gone through probably 12 to 15 mergers in my career. And through these, companies coming together, two companies coming as one, sometimes it's three companies coming together as one. So moving from, maybe more of a traditional org design structure, a little bit more siloed by departments to, cross-functional matrix organization, how tough this was for people to understand. And so we had to move away from just the logical reasons for this. We had to get into their sentiments and their emotions and the why it's going to be better for the business and for themselves and for the teams, etc. So, and just repetition is super key. And you just have to be super hands-on with the leaders, with the employees. It required a lot of one-on-one conversations. It required a lot of all hands and team meetings, really talking about the strategic why behind it. Another example I can think of, obviously, is an economic downturn. So a reduction in force. I think in the last few years, a lot of tech companies have been through this. So when you have to let go of, call it 5, 10, 15% of your employees, you're really concerned about the impact that it's going to have on your culture. I think culture was majorly on the line on that front.
Yeah. I think it makes me think of a lot of different kind of those situations too, like that change management piece around culture and how you're making sure that it's at the forefront. And then doing a lot of work, I imagine, through lots of the leaders that you and not being able to control that also of like what that's exactly going to look like and having to trust it's like in someone else's hands, but really needing to push the needle on all of those places is can be so challenging. And especially through those restructurings, like you mentioned, it's just like every kind of cut is going to impact the culture in some way. And you don't exactly know how it's going to until it's kind of shaken out in lots of spaces.
Yeah. And sometimes in hindsight, you look back and you're like, that was a great decision. And that was actually really positive for our culture. But it's human nature to resist what is different. And it's human nature to resist change. And actually heard something that people don't fear change, they fear loss. So through that restructure, what were they fearing? They were fearing loss of autonomy or loss of, their team members or loss of efficiency or whatever that was. But you kind of have to really try to understand what they're resisting. And it's not the change in itself most of the time.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's kind of going like a layer deeper under like change is a huge umbrella term, but like what are those kind of specific things and like how is it directly impacting these different individuals to be able to cater to like, okay, what do I have to proactively answer like or look to address so that we can manage that change in a more effective way.
And that takes time. It takes time to understand that and ask questions and, really kind of dig deep as to, I see you're frustrated. Why? Tell me more. What are your hesitations? What are you concerned about? So what's the fear in this? What's the change for you? How does it represent? So just asking all those questions one by one to really kind of dig deep and try to either mitigate some of those risks or just to alleviate some of those uncertainties or insecurities. That takes time.
And how do you make time for this in a world like where we're just, I'm sure you're moving so incredibly quickly. You're doing all of the mergers, all of the things at the same time, your due diligence, and then also trying to bring your leadership team along and then employees and whatever that all might look like. How do you make the time for that?
I mean, nothing's perfect, and we talk about cutting corners. We've cut numerous corners in the past, but I would say, my role is really there to be, like I mentioned before, the advocate for our culture. It's there to be a coach to our executives, to kind of coach them and give them the tools to have those conversations with our folks. I can't have 700 one-on-ones with employees, but I can give the leaders the tools to be able to do it for their teams. Some of them do it amazingly. Some of them need a little bit more support. So I think that's, really empowering the leaders and just giving them the tools and the resources, the training, the coaching, whatever it takes for them to be closer to their teams and, to get to the bottom of it and just making sure that they make the best decisions, within a time frame, the best decision for the business and for their teams.
Yeah, I'm kind of like hearing that coaching that leadership team and holding them accountable ultimately. And this is your space. Like obviously this is an area you're an expert in and you know where you can guide them to, but you can't make them do the thing. So you kind of just have to not hope and pray, but sometimes see it to a place. I'm curious, can you use a crisis to actually strengthen culture? And have you ever done that?
It's a good question. One of my old colleagues that I worked with, a beloved colleague, would say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And I cling on to that because sometimes when you're like, okay, this is a crisis, and all you see is the negative, but deep down that you're like, no, hold on, there's an opportunity in this. So what is the opportunity that we need to seize? And sometimes you don't see it right away. Again, hindsight 2020. I think one example, again, if we talk about a reduction in force where you're like, this is a crisis, we have to let go of our employees. There's an economic downturn. There's macroeconomic factors that are forcing us to rethink our structure, our cost structure. And unfortunately, we have to let employees go. So you could think that only negative things will come out of that situation. And I was the first one to be like, this is so bad for our culture. And, we've built something great. Our engagement scores are great and our turnovers, under control. But of course, a reduction in force will always be painful for employees who are leaving, of course, and employees who are staying. So we have to think of those employees as well. And just by having one person leave the organization, your culture can shift because culture is always changing. But when you have to let numerous people go, regardless of the size of the teams, it could really have an impact. So one of the reductions in force that we did a few years ago, it was when a lot of tech companies were doing it, and we were much of the same at Share Through. And I think we used it as an opportunity to really build trust and act with transparency and empathy through this. And that goes in different ways, and how we were able to be super open about it on the reasons why we had to do it and the reasons why we chose the employees that were let go, by being empathetic, for the managers having to announce to the employees that they were being let go, or the managers advising their teams that somebody was let go, by having leaders stand in front of the teams and say, this is super hard. It's hard on all of us, and just acknowledging that it's difficult. So, being transparent, humble, thoughtful, caring, in the messages that you do. And then this really helped us kind of reinforce our values, who we are, deep down, and our core values back in the day. So we really kind of focused on, we're stronger together. Even if we are now a smaller team, a smaller company, we're stronger together. That was one of our values. Caring. So that was another one of our values. So we cared for the employees leaving. We cared for the employees who were staying. We cared for managers having to, bear this bad news to everybody. And what we're ultimately doing is we're caring for the success of our business moving forward. That really helped us to reinforce who we were and what our values were. and that just, yeah, created just a little bit more resilience. It unified us as a team. And I kind of walked into the office one day and I'm like, people are going to be throwing tomatoes at me. I was just like looking down and I was just like, no, I'm not going to look down. I'm going to look at people and I'm going to go and see them. And I never got so many messages of, Stacy, I know this was hard for you and your team, but thank you for doing hard things well. And I never got so many messages of thank you and thank you for doing it well while we were unfortunately letting people go. But that just comes to show that there were some positive things that came out of it. So never let a good crisis go to waste.
I love that little nugget. And I think it makes sense, also at an emotional level when two people are going through or a team is going through a challenging time, it's also like an opportunity. I'm kind of hearing like an opportunity to connect out at a deeper level and on that kind of emotional space of like, yeah, we're both going through a really hard time and this is challenging. And I find looking back, it's always one of those moments where you're like, oh, we've learned so much together or we've grown so much together. Like the teams that I've been absolutely the closest with and colleagues is like, we've gone through some really challenging things together, like the hands down. And it just kind of strengthens those bond. And of course, that's like a very much like a cup half full perspective. Of course, those things are really challenging and letting go of huge pieces of the workforce or like 10-15% reductions are challenging. And as a people team, you definitely aren't out here being like, we did a great job at this thing. But it is nice to be recognized that way. And I can imagine like how good that would feel for the team, because it's not every day that people do recognize that is a hard thing to do for you as a people team and that you did it well too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But you're right. Just the leadership team overall and how we handled it, the people and culture team, how we work through this together. Again, like those are the common goals and the common things that you work on together really builds a team.
Yeah, like those moments that matter. And it's like, this is one of those moments that matter along that employee in experience, really. Take it and build from it or kind of let that opportunity go. So you've worked over and through dozens of M&As. Have you ever acquired a company that was a cultural mismatch and what happened there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I've been there. It can be super, super tough. So one time we bought a smaller company, which was really agile, another tech company, and super flat from a hierarchy perspective. Not many employees, like I mentioned, really like a move fast, break stuff kind of vibe. And at that point, we were a little bit larger of a company. Processes were defined. We had systems in place. They had a very laid back communication. We had a structure almost with everything, and it was a little bit more process driven, little bit risk averse, let's say. And so I think this was a clash when we were merging because yes, the tech maybe seemed similar. So again, like the product line and, go to market strategies and who we were serving. But I think when we started working together, we really saw that clash. So, the acquired team really felt like all of our processes were long and bureaucratic, for example, and they saw it almost like a lack of trust, as in, why do we have to be so rigid and follow all these processes? Our teams felt like the acquired company was a little chaotic, lack of discipline. Communication started to get a little bit spicy, let's say. Our formal meetings felt way overkill for them. So anyways, the list goes on about the differences that both teams were experiencing. And there were frustrations on both sides. So there's two sides of the same coin, like in any kind of merger and acquisition. So very different types of styles and ways of working. Unfortunately, in times like that, like in all mergers and acquisitions where there's clear differences on ways of working, there's attrition. So unfortunately, we saw some key people go, especially on the acquired side when you say, I didn't sign up for this. I signed on and I was onboarded, trained, and I worked for a smaller tech company. I was super agile, get stuff done, and then you're acquired by a larger company, and that just didn't fit for everybody. Some people really kind of adapted. And I think the key there is that both companies have to adapt. So there's something that both companies can learn from these differences. And so the goal in any kind of merger like this is to appreciate the differences and take the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I love that around because the reality is you're not just trying to like take someone and make them who you are. I think that approach is definitely not going to serve any parties in the long term, but really taking the best parts of each culture and like how are we evolving into this new space of what we're doing together kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's not just about the culture. Some companies, will work on redefining their values so that they're common values. Some companies, when they merge, they'll decide not to do that. To say like, here are
Yeah.
our values moving forward, and that's okay. That's a strategy as well. But I would say in terms of ways of working or just cultural bridging efforts, I would say in how do you redefine either ways of working, communication rules, like as an example, the goal would be to put in place some specific cultural bridging initiatives. So it could be redefining communication standards, it could be redefining ways of working, it could be about having, let's say, reverse mentorship, having cross collaboration teams so that it breaks down the silos. And the goal is really to increase awareness on different working styles, especially if you're working with multiple countries. And again, it goes back to the whatever's different is scary to me. So human nature will not like what's different. But how can you learn to appreciate these differences versus resist them?
Yeah, those are so good. And it kind of ties back to that first piece around like, when does change get hard? This is one of those places that change gets really hard, or culture gets hard, but in this case, change and how you're kind of evolving. Can you name a time where like a culture decision that was made was actually the wrong business decision, or vice versa, or a great business decision, but that was a totally wrong culture decision?
I think this is a classic one in terms of the constant push and pull that leaders face in making a right culture decision versus business decision. And I would say that I think everybody has been in this situation where you have a very good performer who might be bad for culture, or the other way around, somebody who is a cultural icon, a beacon for your culture, but unfortunately in terms of performance, impact, output is not necessarily to the standards. So I think most of us have faced this dilemma
Mhm.
at some point. The high performer, negative on culture, cultural icon, no longer performing. And they both have their challenges. And it really depends what you value most as a company. What are you willing to compromise on? So, on the high performer who's bad on culture, I've learned over time that no matter how talented the person is, if that person is just not a right cultural add or fit, it could really erode trust. It could create a sense of unfairness and could really bring down the team dynamic. I think there's short-term gains on that person who's, a very high performer, but I think there's a long-term cost, and that's cultural debt, which is really, really expensive. So the team suffers, the leadership team suffers in terms of their credibility in making appropriate decisions for the business. And then on the other side, the person who is a cultural icon or really, strong in terms of the company culture, but who's not performing, it's a tougher one emotionally, I think. Because, somebody who has help to build the foundation of who the company is today, may not be a fit for tomorrow's business context, But, either if the role has outgrown them, the company has outgrown them, whatever that is, it does create an imbalance and the team sees it. Again, the team will see or fear that there's a sense of unfairness. So I think that needs to be addressed as well. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but I feel like that is, making the right decision for what? For business outcomes or for culture?
It's a super tricky one, and it's one of those, like, such a nuanced situation, like, until you get to that exact situation and you're kind of weighing those pros and cons, like, when do you make the call, or how are you going to make the call, and what does the organization, to your point, like, what does the organization value? Because if you do value a culture where, like, performance above everything, and that in some capacity in the culture isn't as much of a priority at the moment, then that's okay. And like, every decision you're making is kind of reinforcing whatever that culture it is that you are kind of creating at the organization. I'm so curious. You talked about that culture debt. Can you say more about that?
I think the impact that cultural debt or, tolerating somebody who is not positive from a cultural perspective will have impacts in the long run. Whether it's attrition, whether it's a loss of trust, whether it's loss of credibility, your team is looking at you as a leader and is wondering when you're going to make the right decision. And by avoiding it, it's like you're tolerating something. So that's what I mean by cultural debt. It's just that lack of trust, and that could be hard to recuperate from.
Definitely. Like, you kind of build up on your culture that, like, if the more you put off hard conversations, the more you put off making hard decisions and whatever that might look like, the more you kind of create this huge debt that I can imagine is really challenging to get out of, right? Like, for everything that you're going into debt in culture, like, you're going to need 10x moments to regain that trust in lots of ways. So I can imagine it's like, yeah, we're kind of similar to tech debt. We create so much tech debt, and that's a language that we all are quite familiar with. Then when we think of culture, it's this, like, intangible thing. And how do we talk about that debt that we're creating? And, like, you can't exactly see it, but you can certainly feel it as an organization.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And culture, you can see things, but a lot of it is what you don't see. So, I think you could start by asking your executive team, what's one cultural behavior you're rewarding that you shouldn't be? And what is the one thing that you're ignoring that we should be amplifying? So that conversation will really kind of shed some light as to the disconnect between your intention and reality.
Ooh, I love that. That is, for any of our execs listening, this is a question coming to you soon, for sure. I love that. That's such a great way to highlight that. And just to kind of reflect on, like, we're all moving at like 1,000 miles an hour. And sometimes we don't take a moment to pause and reflect, like, every decision that I'm making, how is this impacting? What am I saying or what am I not saying with what I'm doing? And ultimately kind of just doing a little audit and checking in. Is this the impact I'm trying to have right now? Unintentionally or intentionally. Very cool. Love it. You're also a coach. What is the one truth you whisper to leaders behind closed doors when the pressure is on?
Oh, that's my little secret. I guess if we're whispering anything, we're whispering secrets. But that's a really good question. Your people, if I'm speaking to a leader right now, I would say your people are watching you. They're watching you for cues, not just for answers or the tactical plan or whatever that is. So, your calm is their calm. Your panic is their panic. So in moments of pressure, stress, leaders often feel like they need to show up knowing all the answers, being in control, being a master. As if they have it all figured out. I'm just thinking of, who has been through a global pandemic, who, I don't know if you heard Brene Brown's podcast on FFTs. So Brene Brown's FFTs, fucking first time. So everybody goes through a first time. So again, going back to the global pandemic, do you think CEOs of all of these companies had been through a global pandemic? No. You think that some CEOs have, brought their company public 5, 6, 7 times? No. Have they been through reduction in force like we talked about? Have they sold their company, changed their investors, whatever that is? So there's FFTs all the time, but you have to kind of show up and you have to, yes, you have to reassure your employees and you have to, be stable but you have to be vulnerable and humble. And you have to say, I've never been through this before, but we're going to get through it together. So how can you show that sense of vulnerability? Like, I don't know what to do right now, but we'll figure it out and we'll do it. We'll do it together. And just like that sense of reassurance. So what is that whisper? It's a long, long whisper in somebody's ear. But I think it's just like, take a breath, ground yourself, show up with authenticity and vulnerability. It's not just about intellect and control and mastery.
Oh, that's so powerful. I really love that because everyone's first time through life. We're not doing this twice over, like there's everything that we go through is probably new in some capacity. And there's going to be a new layer that we haven't yet explored. And what I'm hearing is, some of those great leaders are able to be there with their team to then add a place and connection of like, I haven't done this, but we're going to figure it out. I know we have the tools as a team to figure this out. And it's so interesting you say that. Like, I find there's lots of leaders that especially actually in some newer leadership, it's like you want to have it figured out, like you want to come to your team with all the answers. And sometimes recognizing that like, I won't have the answers and that's okay. And the team doesn't care if you have answers often. Like they're just looking for something and some authenticity to your point around like, you don't want to just be saying anything.
And working with somebody who has it all figured out or knows what to do in all occasions, that could be pretty intimidating. When you kind of show up with a challenge, with a problem or a crisis or whatnot, like it's nice to be surrounded by people that actually are able to say, hey, listen, I don't have the answer. Okay, let's crack this nut together. I think that's a lot more kind of inclusive and less intimidating in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And for some of the best leaders that I've had, it's been that place of vulnerability and be like, we don't know and we're going to figure it out together. And you feel a lot more empowered as an employee too.
Yes, I'll be part of the solution. I'm not going to be told what to do.
Yeah. I love that. Well, Stacy, you made it pretty clear that culture isn't the team offsite. It's what you do when the business is on fire. It's how you show up when things get really hard that define who you really are as a company. Huge thank you to you for showing what it looks like to lead with intention and authenticity. If you like this episode, head to certain.co/podcast to get our free deep dive on Stacy's insights. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and catch you next time on What the FTE.